And the book Entwined came out last year.
February 2024. Yeah, so it'll be 2 years in February. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you produced, created, distributed a short film based off of a chapter, which is actually a script in the book. I guess I just want to start with that. Like, it's one thing to, I mean, obviously you're a multi-talented, like to get a lot of projects done. But to put out a short film, like, is that something you had worked on before? Like, are you a creative like that? I guess the production value of it. By the way, it's called Coming Out Polyamorous for Thanksgiving, I should say. And when I put this out in the newsletter, I'll link to it and also embed it. But yeah, so congrats. How did that come about?
Thank you. No, I had never done a short film before. I had never even done a real script before. So my memoir is told in separate essays, so separate stories, if you will, but together they do show my 10-year journey through polyamory. There's a little bit about queerness, gender identity, etc. And I played with form a lot in these essays. And the one that you referenced, Jerry, is written in sort of a hybrid of a script and an essay where you have access to internal thoughts. So having access to a person's internal thoughts is a pretty big difference from going to a script that is meant to be done on the screen. But I was interested in it. I was always curious about creating something for screen. I knew that it would kind of give access to a different audience because a lot of people will watch things but not necessarily read a book.
Right.
And this particular story, because it happened over, one evening mostly with only five characters, and the way I had written it was already a script because it's the story of um, my spouse and I had written a letter to his parents to come out as polyamorous because they wanted to visit us in New York City. They live in the South, where my spouse is originally from. And it was important to us to celebrate with our entire family, which included my partner's other partner, my metamour. So we kind of gave them all this information. We said, we can talk about it if you want. And they said, no, we don't want to talk about it, but we will still come. So the story is basically this dinner where the five of us are sitting and no one has really had a conversation about it yet. So lots of tension, very dramatic. Um, so it felt like to explore adapting something to screen, this was a logical place to start. And I really, really got lucky because I had one friend who works in the industry, Brooke M. Haney. So they came on as a producer and they introduced me. They're an intimacy coordinator. So they coordinate intimacy scenes on screen. Um, and they introduced me to Marin Lavelle, who ended up directed it, and Ellen Adair, who played my role on screen, but they're also a screenwriter. So they were able to help me in the screenwriting
Oh, nice.
adaptation. But this was entirely produced independently. So I had to fundraise. I did an Indiegogo campaign. I got a grant from the Polyamory Foundation. I got a grant from a local arts organization where I live upstate New York. And it's a lot. It was a big project. um, but yeah, the team that just jumped into this project was absolutely amazing. Over half of them were queer. Almost all of them, the production team, were women or gender nonconforming people, which is, I was told, really rare in the industry. So we wanted, we paid them because I want to pay artists for their work, but they were still, giving us a bit of a favor given our micro budget. And they really came into it because they don't get to tell these types of stories very often. So I learned a lot, but my goal was always to release it for free on YouTube as soon as
Right.
possible because I wanted to give access to that story.
So it released over the last week, right? Over the Thanksgiving break.
Yeah, a week before Thanksgiving. Yeah.
Yeah. So, often when queer people are deciding if they want to tell their biological family or friends and people like that, everyone always says, "Don't do it at the holidays. Don't do it at Thanksgiving." Also, you're Canadian originally, right?
I'm
You're from
Canadian. Yeah. So Thanksgiving is
Montreal.
not a big deal
Yeah,
for me.
but you know that whenever there's holidays, there's always
Oh, yeah.
more emotions. So why do it then? I mean, other than you said the family wanted to come together and see each other over this meal.
Yeah, I think Yeah, basically the holiday itself was pretty important to my metamour, Ali. So when Dawn's parents were saying we would like to visit you in New York City, I don't think we were not necessarily dying to come out at that moment in our lives. We knew we wanted to at some point, but it sort of just created the context, which is a shame, like you said, because ideally you don't do it in these emotional moments, yet they create this kind of demand. And I think in polyamory, like everyone does it, everyone finds a way to do it in a way that fits for them. But for us, it was really important. Dawn and I had been together for at least 7 years at that point, and Ali and Dawn had been together for maybe two. Or and the you know, if the parents were to visit, not inviting Ali to come really felt like,
Like a
oh well,
rejection.
exactly, like you're not as important. And it was really important to us to show, no, you're part of the family. And it was at a time when our we were making plans for our lives to be more merged together. We were making plans for her to move in with us and all of that. So it's kind of like we didn't have a choice in a way. We could have decided to just cancel, say we don't want to celebrate Thanksgiving, and we don't, which we don't care about anyway, but we don't want you to come. But it kind of just felt, you know what? Thanksgiving is important to her. We want this to happen. So we're just going to do it.
I have to say, it's become one of my favorite rituals because it's a secular holiday. We don't celebrate the background of the holiday necessarily, but
Right.
my husband and I have been hosting big Friendsgivings at our apartment here in Harlem for about 18 years, and we've had as many as 20 people. But it's more of like this like celebration. It's just like a big dinner party. It's fun. Whereas growing up, I have to say I hated Thanksgiving because I always felt bad for my mom because I felt like she was slaving away in the kitchen alone. We would eat for like 10 minutes and then everyone would go watch football or something. And it was just like the stupidest thing. And then I realized as an adult that just like relationships, you can decide to do these however you want. You can decide, oh, we're gonna queer this holiday. We're gonna make it about other things. And we often have a lot of people who are sort of from foreign countries, grad students or people who don't celebrate. So we also like bring them
Hmm.
in and like, and I just make it about gratitude, right? But you
Yeah.
you show the complexity of that meal and right. I'm actually from the South originally as well, so I know that can be quite a lot of expectation, and that must have been interesting for you. Is he from Alabama originally?
Yeah. Yeah. So, and it was also at the same time important to me, even though this is a true story and there's always a point of view on a story and memory is fallible, all of that. But we did try to portray what happened, as closely as we could. So most of everything that's in there is exactly what happened. But at the same time, it was important to us to try to not villainize the parents too much or make them a caricature of Southern people. Like, knowing that they're Southern obviously explains a specific cultural context, often a specific religious context that guides acceptance and values and the way parents can read this. But there are, parents who have a difficult time with this who come from very liberal areas of the United States too. But I do think, especially the fact that they were coming to New York City to experience this. So it was even in a completely different environment, that it definitely probably raised the feeling of like, what is even happening here for them?
Right, right. There's that dissonance that happens sometimes where you're like trying to make people feel comfortable because there's already an idea that New Yorkers think that they're better or something. But
Yeah, and Don's family will say it's funny because when he's here, people say that he has a very thick Southern accent, but then his Southern family will say that he no longer has a Southern accent at all, Um, so yeah, and obviously when he sort of became an atheist and left the religion that he was raised in, that was also very difficult for his family and particularly his mother. So this sort of tense back and forth around values and how you're organizing your life was not new for them. This was just like another level
I,
added.
I I understand that. I mean, I came out to my parents in the early '90s, but coming out to them as not Christian, coming from people who were Southern Baptists, that was harder for them than being gay. So,
Yeah.
for those who've joined, by the way, Chloe Caldwell, one of your big fans, just said how great the movie is. And by the way, I want
Oh,
everyone to know that if you have questions or want to say anything to Alex, please let us know. If for those who've joined, we're talking about Entwined. We're talking about the short coming out Polly for Thanksgiving. One of the terms you mentioned, and I wanted to make sure everyone knows, is metamour. And last December we published an excerpt from your book about that, and it was a term that I wasn't familiar with, and now I tell everybody about it. So, could you just explain to people who might not know what a metamour is?
yeah. So a metamour is simply a partner's other partner. So that some people in polyamory will have close relationships with their metamours, and some people don't really want to meet them, and they have something that's more that often is called parallel polyamory. The way I have grown to approach my polyamory is a very entwined model where as long as the metamour is interested, I am interested in building a relationship and getting to know them. And I think what I often say is that my book, even though there's a lot of other stuff in it, is a little bit like a love letter to metamours. Because for me, when I was interested in exploring non-monogamy, I didn't think about metamours at all. I was kind of focused on what does it mean for me to have the freedom to explore intimacy and romance with more than one person, and what does that mean in terms of managing my existing relationships. But it was sort of a surprise because people talk about jealousy so much, but
Right.
I hadn't heard, which is still a thing. You know what I mean? Like it's not. Some people think that in order to be polyamorous, or if you stay polyamorous for a long time, it's because you never ever experience jealousy. No,
Right.
not necessarily. You just manage it as any type of feeling that might come up. But for me, metamours became like a real add to my life. So I was really interested in portraying what positive and close relationships with metamours can look like, both in my film and in the book. So in the film, that's another thing that I often say in the little bit of representation that we have of polyamory on screen. Often, first of all, the conflict comes from the polyamory itself. So it's sort of the growing pains or the jealousy or how does it work? We don't know what we're doing. So the relationship between the metamours are often kind of adversarial. And in this particular story, the conflict comes from outside the happy polycule, in other words, the sort of network of, partners and metamours and all the people who are related to each other through polyamorous relationships. And there's also an incredibly loving and supportive relationship between metamours. And that was important for us to carry that through on screen.
So that is one of the things that you also reference in the book, and I think do it really eloquently, is talking about the idea of family and that people have to kind of open their minds. I mean, we talk about found family and chosen family, but that it's not just the nuclear family. Obviously, it's not just the um, it's it's a larger conversation that you're trying to have, right? That's part of the poly conversation.
Yeah, I often describe it as like plenty of people are monogamous and rethink their family structures.
Right.
And I've I feel especially since COVID, I feel like there was a clear shift where people kind of grappling with the resiliency of their family unit or the loneliness that can come through. And there are more and more monogamous people who want to do co-living with other people. And that, to my surprise, a lot of people who read my book were like, oh, I'm monogamous, really happily monogamous, but I have been thinking so much about how much more expansive family could be for me, or how I could design my romantic relationship maybe in a slightly different way, or approach my friendships differently. And something else that surprised me is that a number of queer people came to me thinking, it's really interesting because I'm queer and I've been living in this very traditional nuclear family. And I'm now wondering how come I never even questioned whether that's what I wanted. It's like anything. I always say things should be chosen intentionally instead of
Right.
just being, well, that's the default, or I don't even think of asking myself. And then you can do whatever you want. So for me, polyamory was kind of a way to break that mold Like it's not the only way, but it became my entry into questioning the nuclear family model.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you said is very true, and I definitely co-sign that. But some people don't want to have the choice; they don't want to think and work that hard, obviously.
It's hard
um,
work, I won't lie.
exactly. Um, so I want to talk a little bit because this is one of the things that fascinates me personally is the love stories that we see in popular culture and movies, TV shows, we read in books. And you mentioned that like this is partly to give more of these stories, right? So that people can see things. And we don't have many examples of polyamorous polycules, any of that in popular culture. Are there some that you see as good representations, or some that you remember, or no?
Yeah, I should have a ready to go list for these things. There's a there's a film that came out some years back called Professor Marston and the Wonder Women, and it's apparently
Oh, right.
based on a true story of the creator of Wonder Woman. Um,
Hmm.
and they were a triad, so two women and one man in a relationship, but in the 50s, I think, or at a time where it was even harder than today. The film is not perfect, but I did appreciate that they were showing us love, they were showing us the hard work of creating a family when you have to hide it or it's not the norm. And um yeah, the breaks that can happen, and ultimately, like, I think a lot of what's portrayed is often a primary couple,
Yeah.
so a unit of two people, and they've been monogamous for a while and then they open up, but everyone else is very clearly secondary.
Right.
And in that story, there was at least a lot more merging of lives and treating the whole unit as a family. Which, again, I'm not saying the former model is not good, but it's like anything, we need so many more stories in order for us to see it. And often it's just lacking. I read a book recently, Intermezzo by Sally
Hmm.
Rooney, and again, so what I enjoyed in this is, one, polyamory is kind of one storyline among many others. So it's two brothers who lose their dad, and a lot of it has to do with grief. And one of the brothers is in this sort of complicated relationship with two different people. But over the course of the book, um, they sort of grow into figuring out what something polyamory like could look like for them. And what I appreciated in that representation is that, again, the main issue is that the person who has the two partners, so the hinge partner, is the one being like, well, this is wrong, I have to choose, I can't do this, whereas the two metamours are actually quite nice to each other and quite like okay figuring this situation. So that's also something we don't see. There's probably a lot more I can name.
Well, I think
But
part of what you're getting at, though, is that when we construct narratives, either in nonfiction or in fiction, we're always looking for conflict, drama, and tension. And so we have normally this idea of the triad as being this great way of creating tension and storytelling, right? Like we always think, oh, we need a love triangle, and but somebody has to lose in this thing. So when you're talking about a non-hierarchical, or you're trying to resolve conflict in different ways, it doesn't make for good storytelling. So we don't have those stories perhaps for that reason as well.
yeah, there's literally an essay in my book called Blockbuster Tropes Reimagined with Polyamorous Characters, because so often I'll be watching films and be like, but this film would be done 5 minutes in if monogamy was not a thing, because it's either a love triangle or an affair or the violent revenge from a jaded lover. You know what I mean? It's all centered around that, and there's just so many other, I don't know, plot points or points of tensions that you could come up with. There's a sci-fi book, Iron Widow. I forget the name of the author, and I think she's doing a sequel at some point. So it's like a whole sci-fi story, and in it there is a polyamorous storyline that is not necessarily, explained in detail. It sort of happens and it's just featured, and I hope that we have more and more of that.
So you mentioned the hierarchy, and I know that you strive for a non-hierarchical type of polycule. but you and Don are legally married, and you've even mentioned like, well, I'll get divorced if it'll make it better, and we can be non-hierarchical. So I think that becomes part of the issue, right? Like we have these terms like primary partner, and then that then puts primacy. So how are you threading that? And when people are asking you for advice, how do you talk about those things?
Yeah, it's tricky because like I said, there's many ways to approach non-monogamy, and some people do want to do it in a hierarchical way, and if they find other partners for whom that's also what they want, then there are ways to do it very ethically and happily. When it comes to trying to at, at least one thing that I think is important is to acknowledge the presence of hierarchy and the presence of power imbalance that comes from the societal structures that were given. So I initially got legally married not because I wanted to, but because I'm Canadian and my visa was expiring. And it wasn't, like a sham marriage or anything. We were in love, but it's just the institution of marriage and what it represented was
Right.
not what we wanted. Um, so it's never been a thing that we necessarily need to feel, as a core part of our relationship. Marriage, I have so many thoughts about marriage and how, in a way, if we could abolish marriage entirely, basically the state decides to regulate relationships and give certain benefits only to certain
Yep.
people in a way. And it's just even for monogamous single people, like marriage can be
Yeah.
very detrimental. But all of that to say, given we do live in this structure, now the way we approach it with my current metamour who lives with us, not the same that is in the film and the book, is kind of just looking at the system and being like, what is best for the collective?
Right.
So who needs insurance through, that if you're married, you get that. And then for whom is it better to be single on paper? And it kind of sucks to have to look at it this way, but it's just what it is. And I think acknowledging that if two people are legally married, there's a bit of privilege there. If two people have been together for 10 years and then two people have been together for 1 year, if you're not really paying attention, there's a lot of habits that you might have. If
Right.
only one person goes with you to holidays, getting back to the point of the film, why it was so important to us to include Ali, that's also a bit of a hierarchical thing, unless someone says, I really don't want to celebrate this or I don't want to do this. So it's kind of just a lot of discussions in the open to try to make sure that everybody's needs are met in an equal way. And everybody's needs being met doesn't mean everyone does exactly the same things in terms of
Right.
time spent or legal ties or social events that you go to, etc.
And you're not the accountant there that has the spreadsheet that's keeping track of how much time everyone's spending with each other, are you?
No. I do love spreadsheets. So I'll do spreadsheets for, like preparing a trip or books I read. And if anyone needs to organize something at the family level, I will make a spreadsheet. But no, that's another thing we talk a lot about in our relationships, to not count things,
Hmm.
which of course is easier to do when you feel like you have an overall balance. But the idea when you're just counting all the time and being and comparing, it's just really hard to be in the moment and go with what authentically feels right.
So we started off by talking about the short coming out polyamorous for Thanksgiving, but I want to talk about just the idea of having to come out to people in general, because I have friends who are either in some people call them three relationships, some of them call them triads, some of them call them
Mhm.
throuples. But they don't even tell a lot of their friends or coworkers. And I just wonder what you think about just the privacy and the secrecy creating a culture of shame, and if that's an important part of the poly experience is having to figure out how to communicate
It is a really important part. And, for me, I'm queer, I'm trans, I'm polyamorous. I'm so tired of coming out. Like,
it.
it's just every time I think it's the last time, and then there's something else to explain to people. Um, it's difficult because there's a balance of you don't owe personal information to people. So, but then when you feel like you have to actively hide, or when it's sort of um, affects how you're living your personal life, then even if you don't want to share personal information for the sake of being seen, it's almost just for the sake of being able to operate in a way where
Right.
you're not hiding. Um, but the reason I was bringing the other identities is that there's a lot of debate where some people say, yeah, I've even had people commenting after the film, like, well, you're polyamorous, like the concept of coming out is like a queer thing. And even for a cis straight polyamorous person, there's the default relationship type that they assume you have. And if you don't have it, you have to explain otherwise. And there's a lot of stigma and rejection that comes with it.
Right.
So, so it's a difficult balance to just, especially when we go back to the hierarchy, when you're saying, oh, I know some people who are in triads, but they don't tell even their friends. Typically, not always, I guess, but typically there's one partner that all the friends and families know about, right? So unless the newer partner is the one wanting to hold off on coming out, or where they're sort of driving the experience of hiding this part of their life or not, it can be really, really isolating and um, feeling like a commodity a little bit, to be
Right.
in that seat. But it is hard. I don't mean to say that the people who are the ones saying I'm not ready to come out yet, like it is hard, and you have to balance so much at the same time.
So tell me a little bit about how much has changed in the last year. I mean, we had a major memoir that came out from a straight cis woman more about
Hmm.
being in polyamorous situation. We've had couples therapy finally having
Yeah,
polyamorous people on it. We had a huge New York Magazine, package. I think that was in the last couple years at least.
yeah.
So at some point, oh, I'm actually going to be talking next week to Alejandro Varela about his novel Middle Spoon, which
Oh,
is
I'm
also
halfway through it. Yeah.
yeah. So we're gonna talk about it next week, if all goes well. Which I thought was hilarious. It's a very funny book. But at some point, especially if you're living in the tri-state area, let's say, it seems like everybody's polyamorous or talking about it, but that's not the case.
No, you do make a good point though. When I was trying to figure out, I was like, okay, I don't think monogamy's for me. And I think I even have dates in the book. I think like 2013 is when I was really like, okay, I need to figure out how this works. And I had just moved to New York City from Eastern Canada at that point. It wasn't everywhere. Like I didn't feel like I could put that on a regular dating profile and say that I was looking
Right.
for non-monogamy. I was really scared of my coworkers finding out. Like, whereas now in New York City today, any dating app, you'll find polyamorous people and it's not. However, I'm still in New York State, but I just moved upstate in a red county and it's also not quite the same around here. So I think it's easy to kind of look at these little, like San Francisco or New York and say, now everyone is polyamorous and everyone is accepting. However, it's true that in the media it's much more present. Um, I did I did like an intensive artist as entrepreneur workshop given by NYFA, New York Foundation for the Arts. Highly recommend looking at their programming, by the way, if any artists are listening. Um, and part of it was there were invited panelists reviewing our samples. So I had a literary agent review a sample of writing that I had, and she called my writing commercial, which to me was hilarious because I was like, wow, just 3 years ago, I don't think anyone would have looked at this and called it commercial. But now there is a bit of a buzz around it. And I do think that Molly Roden Winter's book, More, um, sort of either was a catalyst or kind of like oil on the fire, to make it. And that's what's nice about it because her story is very, very different from mine.
Right.
And I know that especially in the publishing industry, some people will be like, "Oh, well, there's already this like polyamorous book that came out."
Exactly.
Or I have a friend who writes about kink, like, "Oh, this very popular book about kink already came out." And it's like, how many books do we have about, I don't know, older men going through grief or divorce or I don't know, it's just we need so many
No, I
more
know what you mean. When
stories.
I saw Molly's piece in the Times, I was like, "Oh, great! Now no one's going to be able to do this book now because she has done it, and now they're gonna be like, there's already that book." And especially in publishing, that's how it works.
Yeah, which is also why I mean,
But then I read
part
the book, and I was like, "Wow, this is actually much better than I expected. It's really great."
It's a really good book, and
Yeah.
it's like anything, my like very specific target audience, like the people who read my book and are like, "Oh my God, this is life changing for me," are not going to be her readers. And same for her readers, they're going to read my book and it's not going to be their book. Yet
Right.
we both talk about polyamory in very nuanced and important ways.
So tell us a little bit about that journey. I mean, you created Quilted Press, right, for Entwined,
Yeah.
and it's a collective, and you've now published two other books of nonfiction and fiction.
Nonfiction, all nonfiction,
All
actually.
nonfiction, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So when I was basically related to the things we talked about, when I was pretty much done with the book, I was doing a lot of research about the literary industry and understanding what the journey to publication would look like for me and what I wanted. And I'm someone who dives really deep when I'm sort of wanting to understand something, and I became very obsessed with it. So I would, listen to publishing podcasts, when I drive, when I shower, when I when I'm about to fall asleep. And one of the things I didn't like the idea of like knocking on gatekeepers' doors. And I really wanted my book to be experimental in form. And based on
Hmm.
everything I was researching, I was told that going the more traditionally publishing route, that is something that they would want to change to a more sort of a traditional memoir,
Right,
form. Um, and the form exploration was very important for me in the book, but also the timeline was really important. I was sort of I was so starved for narratives, and I knew how much I wanted more narratives earlier in my journey, that the idea of querying an agent for maybe 2 years before I find one, and
right.
then waiting another 2 years. I was able to get my book out in less than a year, I think, once I decided, like, "Let's do it." So, when I was researching, I was finding a lot of information about self-publishing and a lot of genre authors having great success in self-publishing. But in my literary circles, the more of creative nonfiction or, literary fiction, nobody talked about it, and if they did, it was in a very sort of, like, looked down upon, like,
Right,
"Oh, self-publishing, poor quality because you couldn't get, a
right,
real publishing deal." But I didn't like that idea, period, Just the idea that, "Oh, I can't be in charge of my own story." But then I didn't love the idea of doing it all by myself. So that's where the idea for Cool to Press came, was like, well, can we self-publish but somehow do it collectively and help each other out and raise money together? So we did a Kickstarter and raised money to hire, a really fantastic designer, because that's another thing. A lot of people will say, oh, self-published books don't have good covers. And it's like, well, a self-publisher of a book is a press of one. There are plenty of micro presses ran by
right.
one person or one or two people. So it's kind of the same. It's just you have to run a business. You have to hire your publisher, you have to raise money if you need, you have to handle sales. And for me, it fitted also with my brain and what I like to do. I basically figured I would rather, it's more energy for sure than if you give your book to someone and they do all that for you. But everything I learned and heard was, well, the road and even to getting a small press deal
Yeah.
can be very long. And I have a lot of friends who have been querying and like can't get anywhere. And that is also very draining. And I just thought I would rather spend that same amount of energy on something that makes me feel like I move forward. And I also ran a lot of projections in a spreadsheet, um, about royalties versus advance versus what it could be like if I own, like, now everything. And that's something that's wonderful with Quilted Press. When you buy a Quilted Press book, all of the profit, 100%, go to the author directly, which is, unheard of.
Yeah. Well, I actually love hearing you even talk about it because you can tell a poly evangelist would start a small press that's a collective. Um, and I also, it's funny because I'm in the whole agent dating game, and I do use the dating analogy on purpose because it feels very much like having to go on these dates and being rejected, or people saying, I really like you, but I don't love you. And I'm like, I didn't enjoy dating before. Like, I'm obviously not enjoying this part of the process. And I'm like, I'm just ready to get married to someone, or, to have somebody make a commitment to me. And it's really hard to get them to commit.
Yeah,
Um,
and the dating analogy works too, and that's, I think it's hard to keep in mind when you are shopping and you get, maybe, you don't get a lot of traction. So if one person wants to offer you a contract, you're tempted to just take it. But maybe you don't vibe with that person, or maybe
Right.
they don't have the exact same vision for the book, or and I feel like you're always, you know, I know people who had amazing experiences at Big Five, lots of people who had terrible experiences at Big Five, and then same with small presses. So you are a little bit taking a leap of faith when you're doing that. So for me, I think just having as much control as possible on who edits, who designs, it still means a lot of work. And I mean, I'm very happy with how much my book got just through word of mouth, really, sort of passed through communities because I don't have a PR team or anything. Um, I have no idea what it would have been like if I had gone a more traditional route or anything, but I'm playing the long game. Like, I really wanna see what it'll be like once I have 3 books out that I also own, because then,
Right.
the publicity machine is not as hard, and also the profits start to compound.
Well,
I
you
don't think I'll
also are doing the hard work. I mean, I saw you, you had a table at AWP. I saw you at
Yeah.
the book fair at the center here in New York. I'm sure you've been to many, many, many other festivals and events that I haven't seen you at, but I know that you're doing the work.
Yeah, and part of why we wanna do this work, because it's not like going to a place like, a book fair. I mean, sometimes we sell a lot of books, but it rarely sort of covers even traveling there and, all that stuff. But a lot of it is also being visible, and you know how they say it takes 7 times before someone sees something before they buy it or something like that. But I am very passionate about letting people know this is possible, because I see so many writers and artists, like even for the film, right? Like, it happens across industries. And there are more and more really famous filmmakers who are kind of going indie, raising their own funds to produce, because the industry is sort of in a very tough place right now. And I think a lot of people, they really don't believe it's possible. So seeing us and seeing, we get compliments on our covers all the time, just seeing like, oh, you're in bookstores, anyone can buy your book, and just telling them like, yeah, it's possible if you it's just like monogamy and polyamory. Like, if you intentionally want an agent and a big 5 deal for reasons that you have, and you understand all of the other options that you have, and you're like, this is the best for me, and I know what that route is gonna look like, then do it. There's no, one size fits all, but I think a lot of people don't think that self-publishing or starting a collective press with their friends is an option. So that's something I wanna do for this upcoming, AWP, which is Association of Writing and Writers Programs, who hold the conference every year. It's in Baltimore this year. I wanna have a little self-publishing guide and a little like donation based, like sliding scale online class that people can take, because
Oh, very good.
we keep asking ourselves like, how can we, like, eventually we would like to have more authors join us, but there's always the balance of like, scaling also requires more work, more funding. I'll be looking at grants. It would be really great if we can have, grants to help us scale a little bit. um but outside of that, I just want to teach people that it's something they can do.
Well, I will sign up for that because I will say in March when I went to AWP in Los Angeles, didn't even know about this conference until then. And I came away thinking like I want to start a small press, but I'd rather join somebody else's small press because as I said, like I didn't do this to do it by myself. It's more fun to do it with a group of people.
Yeah.
And I think that's true that just knowing that these things are possible, I'm an evangelist for that as well. Like, I mean, I was also a Substack skeptic, and the reason why I started Queer Love Project on Substack was just because I realized I could go home that day and just start it, and it cost me nothing. And the
Yeah.
amount of stuff I get for free, I'm like, wow. I mean, of course, I know eventually it'll get screwed up,
Yeah.
and I'll have to figure something else out. But for now, it's fun.
Yeah.
But as you've been doing this, I mean, part of what you're promoting a book, but you're also promoting a new way of thinking. So, have there been any surprises? Like people come to you? I mean, I know when I was at AWP, it almost felt like our table became like this. I said I was a coming out doula. I had people coming and telling me their stories. I had hugs and cries, and it was a very emotional. There was a lot of emotional labor that goes on for me, at least, at these things, and I assume for you as well.
Yeah. For sure. Yeah. It's interesting because I get it both from the polyamory or trans or queer experience, bisexuality, like whatever it is that people see themselves in and it really hits them. But also, like we were just talking about, artists who get so excited by the idea of maybe, oh, I've been hearing nothing, all rejections on this side, but maybe I could empower myself and just do something else. And that is also very emotional. Um, it's interesting because I specifically wrote my book saying I don't want to write a how to guide and I don't want to teach people how to do this. I just want to write my story because one, I felt like among the books available, self help content was sort of the most prominent, and what I was really craving was narratives. So everything I do, I try to keep it on the storytelling end of things, but of course is very porous, right? Um, and I did offer a writing non-monogamy class last February, which I want to do again this February. Um, and it was, I think a lot of people get intimidated because they're like, "Oh, I'm not a writer." But I specifically tried to message, like, this is for anyone who wants to just put their story down. You don't have to want to publish. You can write it just for yourself. And it created this small group on Zoom where none of us had ever really been in a writing workshop that was only non-monogamous people. So hearing each other's stories and receiving prompts and readings that are very tailored to what your life and relationships and experiences might have been like was so special and kind of like you
Yeah.
said, really emotional. And I do get a lot of readers messaging me and, asking me a few questions for advice. And I do give advice like informally to friends and people I know, but I think it's hard for me when I don't, like, I'm not a relationship coach. So another thing I keep saying I need to do is put together sort of a list of resources for people who might need more one-on-one coaching. But it is, people do read my book and still learn things, even though it's very specifically my story without saying what's good and bad. It's just, I do go into what for me were mistakes, what I learned, what my life looks like now.
I have to say, you gave me chills actually talking about a workshop only dealing with non-monogamy because I was working on a memoir for years about my non-monogamous relationship. And most of the people in the workshop I was in were straight cis women who were older than me. And I got so much negativity where I literally had one woman just say to me, like, that's not love. And I didn't know what to do, and I ended up breaking up with that workshop because I was like,
Wow.
"I don't need to be here getting that sort of."
Yeah,
I first of all, I want you to talk about the writing, not about my
sure.
relationships and my way of living my life. But it is true to have that safe space to be able to explore these things without the fear that somebody's. But at the same time, I thought, well, most people who buy books are women, and they're mostly straight women, so I need them to be able to understand, what I'm writing about. But then I was like, maybe this isn't my audience.
Well, you make a good point, like, who is your audience, right? And that's something that came up for me a lot writing my book and also doing the film because I knew the
Yeah,
film would be maybe passed around online in a way that the book, like, for someone to want to buy a book, like, I feel like typically they have to be pretty invested in, like, what the topic is. But that's another reason why I was reticent going with a bigger publisher or maybe a small press who's not very specifically queer or, you kind of have to ask yourself when you're writing about marginalized identities and topics like this, am I writing for the community that I'm part of? Or am I writing so that people who are outside of this community will understand? And
right.
of course, it can do both, but sometimes you have to make choices.
Yeah.
And
I mean, all writers have to make a choice about who their audience is. Yeah.
right, exactly. So in the film, I there was a specific moment where we were questioning, like, are we, even down to a specific line where it became clear to me, okay, if I'm making this film for polyamorous people, I'm going to write it this way. If I'm making this film so that people who are not polyamorous need to understand, I'm going to write it this other way. And I decided to focus on the polyamorous community.
Right.
And in my book too, doesn't mean you have to be an experienced polyamorous person, but I think at least a person who is thinking about it or curious about it then gets invested in a different way.
Yeah. Yeah. So I have a couple questions that I want to go over, and these are the maybe harder ones. I ask everybody how they define love, and it's always a difficult thing. But you've obviously thought very deeply about this, and you even leave us in the book talking about how you changed your perceptions of romantic love and are looking for this abundance. So yeah, how do you approach that word that is one thing in French, it's another thing in English. It fails us in all languages.
Yeah, it's a very difficult question, and I love the question though. I should try to like sit down and get to my own definition. I also read a book. I need to reread it because it's been a long time, but it's called What is Love by are you familiar with it?
We keep going.
Oh, it's What is Love by Jenkins, Carrie Jenkins. And she is a polyamorous philosopher. So she's writing this entire book, like, breaking down, like, okay, the biological components of love and the social components of love, and trying to come up with a way and, understanding why so many people think, like this person in your workshop saying, well, that's not love. Like people have such a narrow definition of what it is. So anyway, just sidebar to recommend that book. I think for me, the biggest shift that happened. So when people talk about love, broadly they often talk about romantic love. And for me, I guess all the different types of loves that exist, like friendship love or romantic love, or even a type of love you might have with like collaborative partners that you work with, it sort of became all blended in a way that I didn't see coming. Um, I think people like to have a very specific set of things that you must do and not do with like, this bucket of love, that bucket of love. A big thing that typically will differentiate romantic love and platonic love will be sex, right? And I think it erases the experience of a lot of people. And in the book, you also see me at some point kind of questioning my own relationship to sexuality, and at a point in my life not really wanting sex in the same way that I used to, and being really tortured. Like, does that mean that my romantic partners are no longer my romantic partners if I don't have sex with them? But no, you can be very romantic with your life partner still, and also you can end up being romantic with someone you never had sex with who is more of a friend
Right.
in the category. So I don't have a neat response to your question, but what I'm trying to say is that for me it all became very gray and part of a spectrum, very much like gender. um and it
I'm going to use the
also,
word fluid because you're using this hand motion as well.
yeah, yeah. And I think commitment is something that people like, depending on what's the type of love you have with someone, including, love of family of origin. There's like
Right.
different levels of commitment that they're like, well, that's the level of commitment that I'm giving to these people. And friends often kind of go lower. There's
Right.
like family of origin, romantic love, kids, and then there's going to be your friends. And that is also something that has shifted with me over time through the lens of polyamory, even though there are a number of people that I'm not at all romantic, or they're not, nested with me, living with me, but I try to see these relationships as just as important and make
Right.
priority to spend holidays or spend time or show up, last minute if someone needs help, even if that means creating inconvenience to my life partners.
Right. Well, and so that kind of flows into my next question, which is, you offer some feedback and advice, and it's always hard to give advice, and you don't want to be a relationship guru. And I know I don't want to be one either. But I know that we're curious about why some people are still struggling with being able to make these connections or to be able to find them. And then some people could be angry and say, well, you're taking up all of the love because you're not just keeping it to one or two people. You're, open to. So what do you say to younger people, especially who come up to you and are struggling or like, am I ever going to find love?
Yeah, that's a hard one. I think yes is the answer. You will. I think the first thing is kind of figuring out what you want, right? Like there's a lot of self exploration you can do. And I'm not saying like a part of figuring out what you want will be sort of trial and error, trying it with partner who are willing. But I think so a lot of people will think, well, I want non monogamy or I want polyamory, and then find a person who is polyamorous or wants that too, and then it doesn't quite work out. There's just a lot of different ways to approach it, right? So I think the more over time you know exactly what you want and don't want, like what types of relationships do you want or don't want with metamours, or what kind of time commitment are you looking for, and these types of things. You can more easily find compatible people. Um, and then, yeah, I guess it's just trusting the process, and it's, like you said, going back online dating and meeting lots of people can be tiring. So trying to figure out a balance for that to work for you, but also relying on maybe love you already have in your life and you're not necessarily seeing it that way. And it doesn't mean that, you can only rely on your friends when you have sort of a specific longing for something different, but uh, love comes in many forms and from many different people. So it can, I think, reduce the sort of the feeling of loneliness and the feeling of feeling a little discouraged, thinking this won't happen for me, when the life that you're creating at the moment is still fulfilling, even though you're
Yeah.
kind of longing for something else.
Well, and you also mentioned, and this is a theme that I've noticed it's been coming up in many conversations that I've been having with people, is that when a relationship fails or ends, it doesn't mean that there wasn't love, and that can actually be a great uh, learning experience. And I know I tell people, if I hadn't dated the boyfriend I had before the man that I'm now married to, I don't think I would have been ready for him. He probably wouldn't have wanted to date me because I was a bit too codependent. But luckily, the boyfriend before kind of broke me of some of those bad habits and taught me things. But he even said to me, he was like, "I just think these are the relationships I need at the time for as long as they last, and then I'm happy that I had them and I move on." And I wish that for many people because they stay in bad relationships too long sometimes, partly because they don't want to be embarrassed of their failure.
Yeah, or like go back to square one. And that's a very mononormative lens to look at it. Basically, it's like anything that doesn't essentially last forever is a
Yeah.
failure. And I think that when people think about that, it's like there's not much that you would necessarily like if you don't keep, well, maybe once upon a time it was viewed that way, but now if you don't keep the same job forever, it's not seen as a failure. You get to, your needs change, you change jobs, and like you said, you learn. And I mean, for relationships that were healthy and happy for a while, you had a lot of happy times, a lot
Mhm.
of just like the existence of being together was happy and worth it until needs changed and then it didn't work out anymore. And another thing that I like to talk about is relationship transitions instead of
Mhm.
breakups, because if you stop seeing when you're in monogamy land, it's very binary because it's like, well, if some of my needs cannot be met here, then we must break up in order for me to find someone else. But if it's not binary like that, then maybe it can be okay, our relationship had this structure before, it looked this way, and now we have evolved as people, our needs have changed. So we're going to redefine our relationship in a different way in order to continue building it. And that can take really any shape. So I think moving away from that idea of failure and redefining success in relationship, which is what I like to tell artists too. Like so many people
Yeah.
are bogged down. Like if I don't have the big five deal as a writer, then it means it's a failure. And if I self-publish, it's not a success. And I'm like, well, what's success for you? Like I
Exactly.
receive messages from readers all the time who tell me my book changed their life. And it's like, that's success. Whether it's one person or 500 people, like it is success.
I think everything we're also talking about is relating to one of my favorite things I've started saying over the past, actually, since I've started doing Queer Love Project, is that queer relationships are elastic and that these people may be a romantic partner at one point. They might just be a good friend. They might change, but it's like, most of my close friends, I've actually had sexual relationships at some
Yeah.
point with them, but we're able to transition from that. Whereas I know a lot of straight people sometimes have a difficulty transitioning from one to another. And that the elasticity is what I really enjoy. It's actually why I don't have one in front of me, but why I bound our zine with a rubber band. It's like queer
Yeah.
relationships are elastic. So
Mine is not right here either. I have a
yeah.
copy of it and it's beautifully done.
But I'm working on the second one. I wanted to do them quarterly. I still call it quarterly, but it's a lot of work, as you know, to
It's
self-publish.
hard. Yeah.
And so I'm going to have a new one by the time I see you in Baltimore for AWP.
Nice.
I mean, you have so many projects and so many creative things. I don't like talking about, what you're looking forward to in the new year, but I know you are. So what are your
Yeah.
big creative projects for next year?
So I'm really looking forward to writing fiction.
Oh, nice.
It'll just be a nice respite. I still love nonfiction. I know I will write it again in the future, especially now that I live with my partner, my metamour, and her biological kids that, they're my stepkids, but we're very much raising them as a three-parent household. And that is also an experience that I don't see reflected, anywhere. But I want to work on a rom-com, kind of like a polyamorous rom-com that also includes metamour love because, I'm so glad I did my film, but there's some love and laughs in there, but it's also very tense and dramatic story. And I just feel like there's so much in polyamorous stories that are focused on struggles and,
Right.
and just like queer stories in general too. And it's like the queer rom-com definitely has been having a moment and there's more and more of it, but the queer and polyamorous rom-com, not as much. So I'm really excited to kind of dive into a world that I can create from scratch with no
Yeah.
constraints in terms of like, well, that's my life and that's what happened and those are the people in my life. So that's one thing that I want to work on. And then I'm going to be announcing them soon, but there's a couple classes I want to teach. So a self-publishing class and then again a writing non-monogamy class. And I'm toying with this idea of doing a monthly like story salon
Mm,
on Zoom where people can kind of just come and exchange stories. So again, not like a peer support group for like polyamorous
yeah.
people who want advice, but just kind of sharing, like there can be a theme every month and people just getting to share little slices of their lives because we just don't have enough stories.
I agree. And I think creating community is what it's all about. So I'm glad that you're
Yeah.
doing it too.
Yeah.
Well, this has been fun. Thanks for sharing some Sunday with me.
Yeah.
And
Thank you for having me. This is so great.
I'll be putting out all of the stuff we recommended in the newsletter later today. And I'm sure I'll be seeing you in real life soon.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day. And thank you everyone who tuned in.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Bye.